Content warning. The Matherson Marriage contains unhealthy relationship dynamics and fictional domestic abuse. If you are in a real-life Matherson marriage, please reach out to the appropriate authorities for help. Resources you may find helpful include the Pixel Project's Domestic Violence Resource page and UN Women's International Helplines list. Resources will be linked in the video description for accessibility. Hi! I'm Morgan, and today I will be reading to you from The Matherson Marriage by Ruby M. Ayres. Chapter 27. Lynn stood at the open window, his hand still grasping the latch, staring at Pansy as if she had been a ghost. His face was white and drawn, and twice he tried to speak and failed, and it was she who at last broke the silence with a little shrill laugh that had nothing of mirth in it. You needn't try and send me away, and you needn't pretend any longer, Lynn. If I die, I will not leave this house until you have told me the truth. He dragged the window to behind him, but his hand shook so that he could not fasten the clasp, and he left it swinging open to the night. The truth? What do you mean? There's nothing to know. You ought not to have come here. You know what has happened. Everyone in the village has cut me. I was hissed at His voice broke. The strange tragedy of Pansy's face relaxed a little, and the eyes that had not known the relief of tears for days were misty as she held a trembling hand to him. Oh, you poor boy. Lynn turned sharply away. Don't! For God's sake, I've borne all I can bear. Go away, Pansy, I beg of you. If anyone saw you here, you ought not to have come. What would people think? If you have any pity for me. She took a step towards him. If you have any pity for me, you will tell me the truth. I know. Some of it, but I want to hear the rest. Oh, she broke out wildly as he shook his head. Haven't I suffered enough? Isn't there anybody in the world I can trust? I thought I could trust you, Lynn, but you failed me too. His white face was streaked with painful flush. Violet has broken her word, and she promised me. He stopped as Pansy gave a little cry of intolerable pain. Violet, too? She knew. He passed an agitated hand across his eyes. I don't know what I'm saying. Don't listen to me. I think I'm half mad. Pansy, for God's sake, let me take you home. When you've told me the truth. He broke out angrily. The truth? What do you mean? I've nothing to tell you. You might have spared me this. His voice was harsh. He seemed hardly to know what he was saying, but Pansy said quietly, I told Basil tonight that I shall never live with him again, and I never shall, whatever happens, so it won't make any difference, whatever you say. I mean, there's no longer any need to try and protect him. That's why you did it, I suppose, because he was such a coward. She drew a shuddering breath as she thought of the morning when Buster lay dead at her feet, and the last remnant of her faith in Lynn had been shattered. But she went on. I blamed you for everything. I've tried to hate you. I've prayed that I might never see you again, and yet tonight, when Basil told me what he did, something in my heart seemed to cry out that it was a lie, that you couldn't have done it, that you wouldn't have been so cruel. Her voice broke. And so, if this is the last time we are to meet, I beg of you, Lynn, if you ever cared for me at all, to tell me the truth. No, there's nothing to tell. I've told you. He looked at her and cried out again with rough anger. Violet has broke her word, and she promised me. Violet has told me nothing. I overheard some days ago. It wasn't her fault. I waited to make sure. I had to wait till after. She could not go on, and Lynn broke out again. Let me take you home. It was kind of you to come, but there's nothing to be gained, Pansy. What's done is done. Let it rest. Try and forget it. She raised her sad eyes to his face. As you have forgotten me, do you mean? She asked. Forgotten you. He made a desperate effort to control himself, then turned away and flung himself down at the table, burying his head in his arms. Go away, Pansy. If you have any pity for me, go away, he groaned. I can't, Lynn, till I know the truth. She moved closer to him, but did not touch him as she went on. Basil killed Buster. I know that. The quietness of her voice was more tragic than any wild outburst could have been. But there is something else he told me, and I must know if it's true. He said that he knew about us, and that you paid him £20,000 not to divorce me and leave me on your hands. Her voice broke suddenly. I know it isn't true, but I must hear it from you. Say it isn't true, Lynn, or I think I shall die. Ramsden rose slowly to his feet, his face the color of ashes, his eyes blazing as he looked at her. He told you that. The damned hound, the despicable brute! His voice was labored with passion. He told you that, did he? Very well. Then I will tell you the truth. It's true that he found out. He saw us together that last night, and he came here, to me. He was in many difficulties, and he wanted help. I had already refused, and I told him again that it was impossible for me to do as he wished. Then he tried to force me. He brought your name in, and he said he would divorce you and take Buster away unless I... He looked away from her, unable to bear the pain and humiliation in her face. I knew the boy came first with you. I knew it would break your heart if you lost him, and so I consented. I was to stay away from the house, never to see you. Those were his conditions, and mine were that Buster was not to be taken away from you. I knew how you dreaded even the thought of a boarding school. The bargain was never to be spoken of by either of us. He drew a harsh breath. I would have kept my word, whatever it had cost, but now he has broken his, and broken it with a cowardly lie as well. I consider I am free to break mine. God knows I've been through hell since that night. He covered his face with his hands, and the silence was unbroken until he struggled on. If you suffered, it was 1,000 times worse for me. Sometimes I've been desperate, and then the other morning it nearly killed me when you said that all the sorrow you had ever known had come through me. I, who had given my life for you, my beloved, my beloved. He stumbled to his knees beside her. He put his arms round her, hiding his face against her dress. Pansy laid her hands on his broad shoulders, looking down at his bowed head with a strange, awakened expression in her eyes. Then she said quietly, You still love me, Len? He flung back his head, looking up at her. Do I love you? His eyes were wonderful in their tenderness. Do I love you, my beautiful? He said, unconsciously using the words in which Pansy had always spoken to Buster. I love you with all I have, and am, and hope to be, forever and ever. Len! She spoke his name in a little sobbing voice, and suddenly she began to cry. She cried like a child, standing there with the tears running down her face, looking at him in helpless sorrow. And you won't leave me. You won't go away. I've no one else but you. Take me with you, Lynn. Take me with you. He rose to his feet, and she put her arms round his neck, but it was not a passionate embrace. She was more like a child about to be parted from its only friend, terrified of being left alone, than a woman with a man who loved her. Take me with you, Lynn. I don't mind being poor. I won't mind anything. If only you'll take me. I can't stay here. I shall die if you leave me. I've suffered enough. It didn't matter while I'd got Buster. But now there's no one. She laid her face against him, and for the first time since Buster's death sobbed her heart out. It was so cruel. I never even said goodbye to him. I wish I could have died. If I could only have kissed him once more. If he'd only just asked for me. He did. My darling, you were his last thought. His last words were for you. Her sobs quieted a little. He was fond of you, Lynn. He was always asking for you when you didn't come. He thought you'd forgotten us, as I did. Don't, Pansy, don't. But you won't leave me now, will you? You'll take me with you. I won't be a drag on you. I'll work. Pansy. His voice broke, and he tried to laugh. Don't you think I could work enough to keep you? That I should adore working for you? She looked up, a pathetic hope shining through her tears. You will take me. Oh, my love. My love, was all he could answer. He bent his head, and their lips met in a long kiss. Then she felt his arms relax their grip of her, and she cried out, clinging to him, You'll take me with you, Lynn, promise me. She looked up at him, and in the sorrow and passionate tenderness of his eyes, Pansy read his answer. He would not take her. He began passionately trying to explain. I love you too well. You know what Matherson is. Supposing he would not give us your freedom. I couldn't bear it, Pansy, to know it was my fault, to see you ashamed, humiliated. It would kill me if you ceased to love me. Oh, my dear, you might. He broke out hoarsely as she tried to speak. I understand better than you what it would mean. We should have to go abroad. Nobody would want us. We should have one another. He shook his head. You think you wouldn't mind, but you would. And even if you didn't let me see it, I should know, and it would break my heart. It seems easy here, tonight, to say we don't care, that we only want one another. But there's tomorrow to live through, my darling, and all the tomorrows, and it seems to me that if one really loves... She cried out passionately, If you really love me, you won't leave me here alone. His face quivered with intolerable pain. If I loved you less, I should have taken you away long ago. I knew you weren't happy, and I wanted you. Pansy hid her face. There was Buster, then, she whispered. Lynn bent and kissed her hair. There's Buster still, my darling. You'd always be unhappy, wondering about him, what he would think if he knew. You break my heart, Lynn. You break my heart. His face fell into haggard lines. I sometimes think mine's broken, he said, and then for a long time neither of them spoke, till Pansy broke out again desperately. You don't know what it will be like if you leave me. I can't bear it, Lynn. I can't. Take me with you. Oh, dear, I beg you, take me. I'd give my soul to take you. She looked up at him quickly. Lynn, you will, if you love me. I can't, Pansy, I can't. His voice was hoarse with anguish. She fell back a step from him. You mean it? She asked at last, in a queer, strangled voice. Yes, God help me! She stood staring up at him, as if she could not believe it, her face pale, her eyes white and piteous. Then she moved away from him to the unlatched window. The garden was pitch dark outside, as all her life would be henceforth, she thought, as she mechanically pushed open the window, which had been blown to by the soft night breeze. Lynn followed. He stretched out his arm, barring her way. Say goodbye to me. Pansy, say you forgive me. He was almost sobbing. It seemed the last and most terrible blow that she should have come to him, only to be driven away. With all his love, he could not help or comfort her, dared not. She shook her head. Then, quite suddenly, she turned and clung to him. I would have followed you to the end of the world, and to the end of my life, if you would have let me, she whispered. Lynn tried to answer, but he could not speak, and she felt his tears on her face as he kissed her again and again, till at last Pansy spoke in a weak, beaten voice. Let me go now, Lynn. They went out into the darkness together, and down the drive, and along the narrow road to the Hazel Lane gate without speaking, hand in hand. They crossed the garden until they were inside of the house, and then Lynn stopped. There was a light in the library window, and the front door stood wide open. Lynn looked at that light, and bitterest jealousy swept through him. Pansy could feel how he was shaking as he drew her into his arms for the last time. Don't forget me. Oh, I've loved you all your life, my darling. I shall love you always, always. Kiss me, Pansy, kiss me, and say you forgive me. She lifted her face and kissed him many times. It will kill me, Lynn. I don't want to live now you won't have me. Not won't. Don't say that. You break my heart. Oh, my beautiful, if only I dared, if only I might. She took his hand and kissed it, and he broke out again. It's for your sake. I want you to be happy. She gave a sad little laugh. You ought to take me with you, then, she said hopelessly. Goodbye. God bless you. There was a moment of madness, of passionate kisses and straining arms, of broken words and tears. Then he had gone, and she found herself walking back to the house alone. I wish I could die, she thought desolately. Oh, God, I wish I could die. Violet had sat on the stairs, shivering during the last interview between Matherson and his wife. She could feel herself growing old as she listened to their raised, passionate voices and bitter words. I think life is cruel, horrible, she thought. Why need we all be so unhappy? When the library door opened and Pansy ran across the hall into the garden, Violet crept stiffly upstairs. Pansy's gone out, she whispered to Joyce, whom she found in the empty nursery. The two girls looked at one another silently. Then Violet broke out. I hope she's gone to Lynn. Oh, I hope she has, poor darling. I hope he'll take her away. Joyce smiled, a wise little smile. You don't know Mr. Ramsden very well to say that, she said. He loves Mrs. Matherson far too dearly to... She broke off, and for an instant the two girls looked at one another with blanched faces and terrified eyes. Then Violet started up and fled from the room. It's Pansy. It's Pansy! He's killed her! She gasped out the words as she raced down the stairs and pushed open the closed library door. Basil! She shrieked his name aloud. Basil! Oh, my God! But Matherson did not move or answer. He had taken the coward's way out of his troubles and had pitched forward across the writing table, his head on his arm, his hand still clasping a smoking revolver. Violet crept across the room to him, her fear driven out by pity. She remembered only that he had once been good to Pansy, to them all, and that since he had lost everything, wealth, wife, and son, she even forgot that the fault had been his own. She laid her hand on his shoulder, letting it creep upwards till it rested on his hair. Basil! Oh, poor Basil! She whispered, and her tears began to flow. And then it says, the end. So I guess the story ends with Basil getting with Basil dying. It is not entirely clear to me what happens to Pansy because we don't see Violet finding Pansy's body. We see her finding Basil's body, so that I feel like there are some loose ends that weren't wrapped up, but that is the end of the Matherson marriage. Thank you for listening to this book with me, and I hope that you enjoyed it or found it interesting. Have a great day. Bye!